Good afternoon. At this time, I would like to call our Suffolk City Council work session to order. I do have several announcements before we start. To start with, Councilman Rector will not be present for our work session and has been excused. Secondly, our two agenda items, Plan of Finance and followed by the 2045 Comprehensive Plan Update, will be switched. Mr. David Rose, who is with Davenport & Associates, our financial advisor, has been delayed. So therefore, we are going to start with the 2045 Comprehensive Plan Update. Mr. Manager.
Yes, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council, as previously provided to you, completion and adoption of the 2045 Comp Plan Update is anticipated by the end of the year. As we move forward to that time, staff will be discussing various sections of the plan with you during the upcoming work session. So this will be a continued process. Tonight, Keith Kennedy, Principal Planner, will be discussing the open houses in which we previously held and recapping some of the received public input. Keith?
Thank you, Mr. Manager, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to keep you all up to date on this process. A couple of things I want to touch on this afternoon. Provide you with an update over the overall planning process. Where are we on our overall schedule? And share some findings with you on what we heard during the open house session that we held just a couple of months ago. And also, as the manager mentioned, talk a little bit about next steps in the process. Starting with the overall schedule, as we've been saying all along, about a 24-month process from start to finish. Our goal is to wrap up this project and bring a plan to you and the Planning Commission for adoption at the end of this calendar year. And we're on track for that. We're revising our schedule based on essentially the amount of work that we need to accomplish between now and then, but certainly our goal is to get you there by the end of the calendar year. We did have a pretty significant engagement effort that we recently concluded, and I want to share a couple of thoughts with you on that. The purpose was to update folks on where we are in the process, as well as provide an opportunity for maybe a more informal kind of a gathering to get input on what we were recommending, as well as you saw on that time frame, just keep the momentum going, keep people enthusiastic, engaged, and continuing to be a part of this process as it goes forward. That takes a lot of effort from everyone, and we certainly appreciate everyone's patience as we work through these opportunities for the city. Again, 3 open houses held in different locations, geographically kind of selected as a way to encourage participation, and at times where we were looking for just making it as convenient as possible for folks to come out and hear what we had to say, what we were recommending, and give us some feedback. This was really our first opportunity to get our message out. You know, what are we thinking about? What are we hearing from the public? What kind of recommendations are we considering working on a little bit further as we carry this process forward in getting a check-in to see, are we on the right track? Are we headed in the right direction in the process? And again, good turnout, good conversation. I think a pretty broad group of folks coming out to talk about what their concerns are. And I want to take this opportunity to thank really the broad array of city staff that it took to pull this off. You know, I mean, I think the logistical part of it, we had a number of department heads represented and their staff represented, and I think people frankly really appreciated that. You know, it gave us a sense of the breadth of the issues that we're thinking about, that we're working on. And it really took a lot of effort from a lot of people to pull this off, and and we certainly appreciate that. We asked a lot of detailed questions, and got a lot of detailed responses, and everybody did a great job, and I think the feedback that we received was very positive. If you weren't able to come out, we've had a couple of other opportunities for folks to engage and really kind of look at the same information just in a different way. We've had paper surveys that have been distributed. We kept the online survey open until earlier this week, and that has now closed as we want to, again, move on, keep this process going forward. And I want to share some of the comments that responses that we got as we go on through the process this afternoon. So, as you all know, this, of course, is part of a bigger effort to engage the community, and we continue to use really all the opportunities that we have to let folks know what we're working on, engaging with our steering committee, using our website and other social media in ways to kind of keep the public informed about where we are in the process and ways that they can participate. Here's a kind of a high-level response of who was there. We do a little bit of polling and surveying while we're at the meeting. We actually got folks to tell us where they live in Suffolk, just to kind of get an idea of the geography. You see the map there, but also asking, tell us a little bit about yourself. We want to make sure that we have a sense of who shows up, at these participation events. We do our best to broadly get the word out and make everyone feel welcome and appreciated and needed to be a part of this process. But this gives us a sense of who showed up and who's participating in the process, and perhaps some things we need to continue to work on to do better as we go forward. So a little bit about what we heard. What we have done is put together a summary report, essentially, of what we heard during the open house process, and that has now been posted online. As I mentioned, we cover a lot of topics and ask a lot of questions and ask for a lot of input. So what I want to do this afternoon is just kind of give you the top level summary of what we heard about at the meeting. I will say, as an introduction, we continue to hear pretty consistent themes, pretty consistent concerns, pretty consistent feeling about the opportunities that are in Suffolk. As a planner, that's encouraging. It makes us feel like we're on the right track and working on the right things. And it even reflects some of the conversations we had back at your retreat. Those major themes that have really been in play for 25 years or so when it comes to managing growth, in this region are still very much on the minds of the public. And that's kind of what we heard. And I think that's reflected here on some of the feedback we got on key land use issues and considerations as we go forward. A general support for a focused growth process, for example, continue concerns with transportation, infrastructure, and the desire for high-quality development. Those are things that have been longstanding themes for this process. Perhaps the biggest issue, as we mentioned at these open house events, is how do we want to grow and where? So one of the questions we had for folks was really kind of identified on this map. Do we continue to evaluate our growth area boundaries and what might be some opportunities for us to think about as we go forward? And we identified 5 of those as shown on this map here in yellow. These are some of the responses we got about that, and again, pretty consistent with what we've heard before. Entertainment opportunities, for example, in North Suffolk. Continue to make this a walkable mixed-use area. We talked about perhaps the area in between the 2 growth areas as being a candidate for expansion, and this is some of the feedback that we got, suggesting that this would be perhaps best as a residential community, but to be careful again about traffic impacts. in protecting the pretty extensive wetlands that are in that zone. Expansion along the 58 and 460 corridor were two concepts that were presented for feedback, and this shows some of the feedback that we got there. Perhaps focus on more job-related uses in both corridors, as it turns out from feedback that we got. Continued support for revitalization in downtown. Again, another really consistent theme. Also got some feedback on thoughts outside of the growth areas, desire for increased recreational opportunities, again, very consistent. Improving connections between different areas of the city. We're a big city, and it feels like we're really spread out, and we are. Are there ways to kind of keep people connected? Again, this is where the question of how we develop comes in. A mixed-use development requires further trips to do more than one thing. So that's a good theme and good feedback for us. Another station that we had set up was around what we call placemaking, or give us your sense of the type of development that you find the most pleasing visually, and oftentimes it has to do with safety. So we got some good feedback on that one as well, and I want to share, again, this is really more of that's what that actual station looked like, identified these different place types, and gave folks a chance to give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and also more detailed comments. Again, I want to just give you a kind of a high-level response. I've got some on the far left of your slide is the traditional neighborhood center, and green means a lot of thumbs up, for that particular type of land use. In the middle is the suburban center. You all recognize that type of often commercial development. Kind of mixed reviews on suburban development. And then on the far right, that's the commercial corridor, and kind of not surprisingly, not everybody's favorite, so more thumbs down on commercial kind of strip development, but we all use it, so that's where we do most of our shopping. So again, getting a little bit of a temperature check on what folks are thinking about in terms of their visual preference of different types of development. We also took the opportunity to get out there what we think are some key draft recommendations. Again, give us a sense of if we're on track, and ask for some feedback on that. And we divided those up into different categories. And again, we've got really good results that we'll post on our website. But these are some of the things that we heard around those key recommendations. For example, again, a support for protecting the rural agricultural areas of our city. Continued support for looking at ways to broaden the opportunities for housing in the affordable kind of workforce housing category. It's something we've heard before. And again, also investing in some of the already developed areas of the city, revitalizing those areas, and particularly what comes to mind there is downtown. Again, Suffolk has natural resources that attract people here as visitors and as residents, very much top of mind for folks who live here, so they continue to be some real priorities there. And, again, one of those sort of contrasts, preserve wetlands and natural areas, but also the bottom one there, recognize that they're attractive and make them available to the public. So finding ways to kind of balance those things is one of the challenges that we'll continue to face. We put a couple of ideas out there about how to approach economic development, and what kind of preferences folks had, what kind of priorities they had, and got some good feedback there. And again, had that representation from these departments to help answer people's questions and give folks a sense of what's currently going on in the city and how we go about doing this kind of work. Again, I mentioned rural lands conservation, very much at the top of people's minds. And and some mention of the subdivision pattern in the rural part of the city. And is that something that we have support for, looking at how we're performing there and perhaps making some changes? And that was very much something that we heard. Transportation, again, continuing to be top of mind for folks, primarily roadway infrastructure, and in keeping up with the development in the city going forward. So again, I think we've got the right topics. I think we're focused on the things that the community is concerned about, and also the areas where folks see some opportunity. So I think for us, this was a validation in some ways of the work that we're all doing so far, and to continue that in that direction going forward, which is really one of my last couple of slides here, is to share with you all where we're going in the next few months. We do have planned a number of sessions like this one with you over the next couple of months during your work session, your regularly scheduled work sessions. And of course, today's just kind of catching up on where we are in terms of what we're hearing from the public, but then start to tick off some of these key topics. And again, developing those ideas a little bit further, getting a little bit more specific about what we think this plan would say in these topics, and getting your awareness of where we're going and your feedback going forward as well, and then using that as we roll out a draft document and begin to schedule the more formal meetings with the Planning Commission, City Council, and bringing that forward. So a real quick look at sort of what we heard over the summer in these open house sessions, and where we're headed in the next couple of weeks and months. We still have a little bit of work to do to pin this down and be more specific about these topics and the dates, but I think we're well on our way to again keeping this going forward and bringing something forward that is a final document for your consideration in the Planning Commission. So let me stop there, Mr. Manager, and take any questions or comments that Council may have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Council, questions, comments? Quiet up here. Okay, it seems that you have answered everybody's questions.
I'm sure that's not the
I
case.
think that doesn't happen that often.
Thank you for your patience this afternoon.
I did have one.
Yep.
Just wanted to thank you once again for everything that you and the staff have done and continue to do in regards to your efforts made to engage the citizens. As I've mentioned it before, people probably get tired of it. It's been unparalleled as far as I'm concerned. I did find interesting that you had geographically noted where the respondents lived.
Yeah.
I think you had some dots
Yeah,
up there.
I can go back to that. That's
Yeah,
actually the
and it seemed to be concentrated in two particular areas. And I know we're doing it, but yeah, we got the northern section and central, and very few outside of there. And I'm sure we're doing it, but we also need to ensure that we're considering everything, even those that have not responded.
Yes.
And not been represented as such in the planning process. Because it is with a lot of issues, certain folks in particular areas with particular issues have a tendency to be more vocal and provide more input than folks that are kind of satisfied with where they are. But those same individuals need to be considered so that whatever is decided, we take into consider what type of effect it'll have on them also, which I'm sure
Yes.
we're going to do, but
Yes.
It was kind of interesting to note. Councilmember Butler Barlow?
I think I turned back off. That's just from the open houses, right? That's just from the folks that attended the open house?
Yes.
Okay, so that's not everybody that's responded to something? You see what I'm saying?
So that's
The-
based
the
on the
100
open house? Is
Yeah,
that-
the 150 are people that actually came to the open houses and said where they were from. So that doesn't encompass all the other ways that we've reached out to people.
Okay, so that didn't take into consideration the online?
That is correct. It is
Okay.
the folks who came and literally put it out on a map.
Well, thanks
Yes,
for
that's right.
clarifying that.
Yes, sir.
You know, I'd be interested to see how that pans out too, if it's similar or we are actually getting a broad spectrum of the population.
Okay, that's correct.
And if not, maybe we can make an effort to reach out to that segment. Okay, council, one more time. Any questions, comments? If not, thank you very much for your presentation and keeping us up to date.
All right, thank you.
Okay, next item on our work session is a plan of finance presentation. Mr. Manager, please provide an overview.
Yes, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, with the adoption of the FY24 operating and capital budget this past May, and similar to previous years, the city's financial advisor, Mr. David Rose, with Davenport Associates, is here this afternoon to present the proposed financial plan for the issuance of bonds necessary to support the general fund and also the stormwater fund capital projects. David, how are you this evening?
Good afternoon, Mr. Moore, Mayor, members of council, and I apologize for being a couple of minutes late, but I could say your downtown is bustling, and that's a good sign. So it took me a couple of minutes later to get through here. Again, all of you should have on your screens our presentation. I feel this is something I've been doing on an annual basis for some time now, and partly because of the very able staff that's both in front of you and to your right and left. So again, without that group, we could not be here tonight, and constitutional officers that also make all this happen. So a little bit of background, as Mr. Moore said, we serve as your financial advisor. For some of you that are a little bit newer, we've been doing this now for approximately 20 years. And so we've seen the development, the growth, and I have nothing difficult to say tonight or this afternoon. It's all good information, and again, it's because if nothing else, the city does quite a bit of planning. The old proverbial, it measures twice and cuts once, and that's what you've been doing and continue to do. So with all of that, everything that we're talking about is making sure that we continue to maintain the AAA ratings, which are the highest ratings possible from all the three major credit rating agencies. And I see no reason that will change anytime soon. Can't say anything more about the federal government, which of course was downgraded today or yesterday by Fitch. So again, if that does have an impact on all local governments, we will keep you apprised of that. But for the moment, the markets were pretty steady today in the municipal world, off a little bit. But nevertheless, again, we will monitor all of that. That said, and Mr. Moore alluded to, typically I'll be here talking about the upcoming annual borrowing for the general obligation for your general CIP, Capital Improvement Program needs. We're also talking about doing a roughly $4.8 million stormwater financing. That'll be separate because that's paid for from user fees and charges tied to the stormwater fund. I mentioned a little bit later in this presentation, the fact that the stormwater fund is self-supporting, that takes more pressure off of the general fund, so it again puts you in a better position, and we're going to continue to do that into the foreseeable future. So having said that, on the next page here, let's start with the general obligation new money. That is part of your adopted 24 through 33 fiscal year CIP. We have typically borrowed roughly in the $30 million range annually. It ties to the expenditures of various projects. And you can see here, really it's two categories. One is a sort of a lumping together of almost $7 million of general CIP projects that are needed here in the fiscal year. And the other is tied to a portion of the JFK middle school, middle replacement project. I would point out some of the good news here from a year ago is that part of that funding will actually be what we call literary loan, and that's 2% money guaranteed, and 3% money. But the other point here is there will be a grant on top of that. That is estimated, it's now at 15 million. That was approved by the Department of Education. The literary loan is still in process, but all of that basically is to say that when the initial planning was done for all of this, we did not know that some of those funding sources would be there. So it just puts us in a better position. In addition, and we'll see again when we borrow this money, what we have always done is to try to estimate on the high side. So for that 30 million that we're planning to borrow with your approval, we've used a 5% interest rate. And right now, we're looking at borrowing rates kind of all in about a percentage point lower than that. But again, that's going to be where we are at the time. We also, for the moment, don't have any refinancings. We've done that in previous years, but if something like that comes about, we certainly will call that to your attention and try to do what we can to get your approvals purely to save money. That's all we're trying to do. We've been in a mode where when we do a refinancing, it's simply to lower the overall debt service. It's not to extend any of the payments beyond the years that are planned for its final maturity. So, a couple other points I always like to make here, and that is when we add in parts of the debt, we want to give you where we are standing and where we think we're going as to some of your self-imposed debt policies. And some of those debt policies, they're rolled into that greater booklet we call your financial policy guidelines. I am pleased to say you're once again well in compliance with all of those. If you are not, you certainly would know that, and we'd be talking about that. But you can see here on the left-hand side is one particular policy that I like to call your credit card. It basically says that we won't spend more than 10 cents per dollar on debt service. And you can see there you're hovering at or below 7%. So you've got a nice cushion. And even when we layer in that new debt, that $30 million, we really stay well below the policy, and that's where we want to be. There was a time, you recall, some of you, that we were considerably above 10%. But again, as the city has grown, as it's thrived, as we've been able to use a good amount of capital pay-as-you-go, we've put less pressure on the overall debt program, and so again, in good stead. On the right-hand side, this is another policy. It basically says just the sheer amount of general obligation debt tied to the taxable assessed value. That actually, once again, well below the 4%. It's roughly hovering around 1.5, 1.6%. And again, we use a very conservative growth denominator going forward. So would not surprise us if that ratio continues to get even stronger, even though it's very strong right now. So let's turn to interest rates. You recall that we tried to look at this and we tried to not guess the marketplace. I learned a long time ago, a lot of smarter people than I am, rates go up, they go down, but really for us, what we tried to do for you is borrow on a regular basis. So some years they'll be better than others, but we try to always make sure that we have the ability to refinance if rates do come down. So while you look at this on the left-hand side, roughly around the time that I started in this business back in the very early 1980s, interest rates in those days were at 14, 15%, and this is tax exempt, mind you. For those of us that were borrowing on a regular basis, they were upwards of 17, 18%. not a very desirable environment. Today, we're looking at something in between 3.5% and 4%. What you did notice, of course, was when the full-blown feeling of the pandemic was here and all the various dollars that the government did, we were hovering in that 2 to 2.5%. I doubt we'll get back to that again. I'm not sure it's a healthy environment to get back to it again, but hopefully the environment we're in right now will stay for some period of time. And if it does, our goal is to try to take advantage of that while on a historic basis, it is well below all of our planning rates of 5%. So let's now turn, if we could, to the second borrowing program. And by the way, I'm going to give you a schedule on both of these in a moment or two. But that second one is the stormwater, and it's a utility enterprise. And what we mean by that is it's self-supporting. Again, it does not need general fund dollars, but rather it's supported there by user fees. And so to that end, we are going to recommend that we do a second borrowing. The last time we did one was in 2022. That was roughly $5 million. So we're keeping in the same mode here. And we try to do these financings, as we call it, just in time. As we spend those dollars, we borrow the money for that. So what you'll see here on page 6 here is over the next 4 or 5 years, we have planned borrowings. So hopefully I'll be back and talk about some subsequent borrowings. Things may change. But again, looking at doing, as we said, roughly $5 million, a shade under for this. We also have pay-as-you-go dollars, which is a healthy thing, and want to continue to do that. And so again, what we wanted to convey is that while we're talking about this roughly $5 million borrowing, our modeling, working with staff, really looks at this over a 5, 10+ year horizon. So we're not going to see, at least short of anything that we're not planning, any surprises in the short run, and don't hopefully have any surprises over the next several years. So a couple more points here. What we're thinking about, as we did last year, is what we call a dual track strategy. We will both apply to the Virginia Resources Authority, which has been set up and been around since early mid-1980s. I recall when they set it up. It's a very good program. They allow us to borrow up to 30 years, fix the rate, but we don't know the rate until sometime in October, early November, depending upon exactly when they go to market. What we typically ask you to do is to set up a parameters, and if they can't meet those parameters that you set up, we just simply don't borrow through them. But that's part one. The second part is we have typically said, because we are a very good credit, let's talk to local regional banks. We call that a direct bank loan. We've utilized that in the past with you on various different projects and programs. And so that's when I say a dual tracking, what we basically say to the banks is, here's what our cash flows look like, here's the overall strength of the city, here's our overall plan, and then we talk about whether or not they're interested. Right now, banking is undergoing a lot of changes. One week, a bank could be interested in doing something for us. The next week, they're being acquired or they're out of the business. We've all seen that. So the thinking here is not to take for granted that the banks will be aggressive, nor will they be as flexible. So dual tracking it is the way to go. And our application actually is due this Friday to VRA. So they get it very early. We go through with them an approval process. No guarantee they'll approve us, but we do feel good that Suffolk should be approved. But if not, we'll let you know that as well. So one more thing I should have pointed out. What they do at VRA is they put together a series of local governments that borrow money. We call that the pool program, and that will occur, typically occurs 2 or 3 times a year. This year it's going to occur twice, in the spring and in the fall. So actually getting this application in is for their fall pool, and you'll see that schedule in a moment. So let's go back on page 8 here to the GO bond schedule. As I said, that's the one I've literally, oh, I've gone too fast. Uh-oh. I must have messed this up. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's see here. Okay, I'll just go forward then. Okay. So the GO schedule, as I said, I've been here now, it seems to me, year after year for a number of years as we continue to move forward and borrow the monies we need for the various projects. So today, August 2nd, we're presenting the plan. On the 16th, we're going to ask if you would authorize a public hearing. As you know, anytime you borrow monies like this, it requires a public hearing. The process, of course, you could see there, has 2 subsequent notices in the paper, and then, of course, it requires the actual hearing, which is right now scheduled for Wednesday, September 6th. That's when you would adopt the ordinance, have the public hearing. At that point, we will then talk officially to the credit rating agencies the week of the 11th, at least preliminarily. Look to get back their ratings within a couple of weeks. So we're giving them a fair amount of time. Look to then put into the marketplace a competitive sale, as we call it. That's what we call a public sale. Anyone and everyone that's qualified can bid on this, and the winner is simply that entity that produces the lowest all-in cost of money for the city. And that point, that's when we lock it up, but there are parameters to that, again. So with all of that said, we're hopeful that we put this to closure by mid-October. There's not a magical date for that, but that's sort of the thinking. And that will be, again, roughly about the time frame that we do this year in and year out. So that, any questions perhaps, Mr. Mayor, or anyone, before I go to the stormwater schedule? I just want to make sure people realize.
Council, any questions for Mr. Rose?
Okay.
Nope, we're good.
All right. And then last page here, the stormwater. Again, we call it the enterprise revenue bonds. The concept, again, revenue bonds, the revenues being the user fees that are supporting that. So here we are again, obviously, presenting the plan. We're going to submit that VRA application with your blessing on Friday. We've been working through that. We'll also send out, that's why we call it a dual track, the request for proposal to banking institutions locally, regionally. We even go nationally. So literally, we send it out to some 130, 150 banking institutions and hope to get back, something like 3 to 5 different responses, depending upon the marketplace. So once again, you can see here we're asking for, simultaneous with the GO, that you authorize a public hearing at the next meeting. Again, all those various public notices to get us to, once again, the September 6th date where we'll have that adoption of the public hearing. Typically, bond counsel, which puts together those legal documents, is typically here with us as well. And as you could see there, we have a deadline for local approvals about a week later, about 10 days later. So we'll be back with anything that we need for you to do. But the hope is that possibly in and around that time, we will have responses back from banks. I will say right now, the banks have not been as aggressive as we'd like them to be. But again, we'll see what happens. It's not an absolute call. The banks will provide certain parameters. We'll evaluate them with your staff, and then we'll say, okay, how does that look with regard to if we were to go to VRA simultaneous? But we can't. We've got to wait typically about a month later. As you could see, that tentative sale is end of October. That's not exactly the absolute date. So once again, it's a bird in the hand if we get some things that are good. If we don't, we feel like we should wait. Again, it's not a precise science, but one thing that is for sure is we will make sure that we have call provisions in anything we do so that if rates change and the markets change, we can be flexible, or they can be flexible, so we can adjust as necessary. I think with that, I don't know if Teelan, no, good. So I appreciate it, Mr. Moore. I don't know if you want to say anything, and appreciate it.
Council, any other questions or comments? Questions for Mr. Rose? Thank you very much for your presentation. I was kind of pleasantly surprised with the rate structure still being at 3.5 to 4 in this environment, and also the fact that you're going to be exploring all these options as far as financing is concerned, and you pretty much hit it on the head. The best you can hope for is get the best rates you can right now and ensure that, you have the call provisions and we have the ability to refinance if the climate, calls for it. So once again, we've always gotten good advice. I'm sure nothing's going to change now.
I'll try to keep that going, and Kyle and myself and my colleagues appreciate all that, Mr. Mayor. We really do.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Oh, yes,
real quick.
Mr. Manager.
I'd just like to remind council, the VRA route is something you've utilized in the past with the utility fund.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right, thank you.
that. Okay, thank you.
All right, that concludes our work session. We do have a need for a closed meeting this afternoon. Madam Clerk, will you please present the motion for consideration?
Item 1, pursuant to Virginia Code Sections 2.2-3711A8 and A1, consultation with legal counsel employed by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring legal advice of such counsel, and the discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for appointment and the assignment, appointment, and performance of specific public officers or appointees of the city, specifically the appointments as shown on the attached list for vacancies or term expirations for the Community Policy and Management Team, the Early Childhood Development Commission, the Economic Development Authority of the City of Suffolk, the Fine Arts Commission, the Human Services Advisory Board, the Library Advisory Board, the Local Board of Building Code Appeals, the Parks and Recreation Advisory Commission, the Sister Cities Commission, the Suffolk Clean Community Commission, the Suffolk Redevelopment Housing Authority, and the Tidewater Youth Services Commission. Item number 2, pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A5 and A7, the discussion of a prospective business or industry or the expansion of an existing business or industry where no previous announcement has been made of the business or industry's interest in locating or expanding its facilities in the community, and consultation with legal counsel employed by or retained by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel, specifically concerning EDIP proposals regarding projects Monopoly, Automatic, and Dynamo.
Okay, thank you. Council, a motion has been presented for consideration. Councilman Fawcett.
Move to approve,
We
Mayor.
have a motion for approval from Councilman Fawcett. Councilman Williams.
Second it.
Second from Councilman Williams. Is there any further discussion of the motion? Hearing none, council members prepare to vote. Please cast your vote. Madam Clerk, please record the vote.
The motion is approved by a vote of 7-0.
That concludes our work session, and we will reconvene at 6 p.m.